Hi friends. Story on Friday presents you, Mountain of the Moon. Written by, Bibhuti Bhusan Bandyopadhyay. In last episode we heard, Alvarez told Shankar, the story of James Martin. Suddenly, one day outside the tent, there was the sound of a foot, and they saw footprints of 3 fingers of a large animal. Diego and Shankar found themselves at Death Circle, in the inaccessible Richtersveld Mountains. Wandering around the same place. The map does not show them the right way, their compass is also useless. However, Alvarez is not one to give up. Thereafter.
After 3 days, they reached a place where a smaller hill of the Richtersveld range was at right angles to the main range. This hill was towards the south of the main range. It was at least 4,000 feet high. Further west, there was a still higher peak, partly hidden by clouds. The valley between these 2 hills was about 3 miles wide, and it was covered by dense foliage. In the forest, there were 3 to 4 distinct layers of vegetation. In the top layer, there were parasites and moss. The middle layer consisted of large trees. And the lowest layer had small plants, shrubs and bushes. The foliage was so dense that sunlight could not enter the jungle. Alvarez decided to camp in the valley, just outside the borders of the dense jungle. In the evening, they discussed their situation as they sipped coffee. They had run out of food, they had no sugar for quite some time. They had coffee, but just about enough for a few more days. A little wheat flour was still left. That was about all. They still had the flour, because they rarely used it. They depended almost entirely on the meat of wild animals, but as they were not carrying an ammunition factory with them, they could not expect to go on hunting forever. As they talked, Shankar looked at the distant mountain peak, which was playing hide and seek with clouds. Suddenly, the clouds cleared for a few moments. The peak that Shankar saw was unusual. It looked like the tip of an inverted ice cream cone that had been partly bitten off. Alvarez said,
"From here, Bulawayo or Salisbury is within 400 to 500 miles, towards the southeast. In between, there is a desert which is about 200 miles wide. Towards the west, the coast is only 300 miles away, but the forests in the Portuguese West Africa are impregnable. So, let's not count on that option. Now, the only way out is that one of us goes to Salisbury or Bulawayo, and come back with bullets and food. And of course, new compasses."
Fate does strange things to human beings. We often fail to understand their significance when they happen. It was a stroke of fortune that Shankar heard the names of the towns, Bulawayo and Salisbury, their directions and their approximate distances from where they were. Later, he would thank Alvarez countless times for revealing these facts to him so casually. Their discussion could not go on for long. Both of them were tired. They went to bed early. In the middle of the night, Shankar was woken up by a strange loud noise from the forest. There seemed to be a huge turmoil in the jungles. Alvarez too had been up. They listened carefully, and what they heard was truly strange. They had no clue about what was happening. Shankar switched on his torch, and was about to leave the tent, but Alvarez stopped him. He said,
"Don't rush out, in these unknown jungles at night. I have cautioned you many a time. Besides, where is your rifle?"
It was pitch dark outside. What they saw in the torchlight defied logic. Wild animals were running desperately, trampling on bushes and small plants. They came out of the mountain forest on the west, and ran towards the hill on the east. There were hyenas, baboons, and wild buffaloes. 2 leopards passed close by them. Male and female colubuses came in large groups, carrying their little ones. More of them were coming, hordes of them in fact. It seemed the animals had sensed an impending disaster, and were fleeing for their lives. At the same time, Shankar and Alvarez heard a rumbling in the distance. It was subdued, dull, like the rumbling of thunder, that was muffled in some mysterious way. Or perhaps, in a place far away, 1,000,000 drums were being played simultaneously. They wondered what it was all about, and looked at each other, astonished. Alvarez said,
Let's make the fire bigger, otherwise these animals will trample down our tent.
The number of fleeing animals increased with every passing minute. Above them, birds too were flying away, leaving their nests. A large herd of springbok antelope came, within 10 yards of them. But Shankar and Alvarez were in a daze so much, so that they forgot to shoot. They had never seen anything like this. Shankar was about to ask Alvarez something, when the real catastrophe struck. At least, that's how it seemed to him. The ground beneath them shook violently, and they were thrown off their feet. They were dumbfounded to see that the impenetrable darkness of the night had vanished, and the forest was lit up as if by 1,000,000 electric lights. Within seconds, there was a deafening noise that was louder than 1,000 thunderclaps. It was as if the earth was torn apart, and the sky had exploded. 1,000 thunderbolts had clapped together, somewhere not far away.
Earthquake,
Alvarez said as he got up. Also, something strange was happening, on the strange-looking peak of the mountain. An immense ball of fire leapt out of it. In that dazzling light, the entire mountain forest turned red. Clouds of fire gushed out of the peak, and rose over perhaps 2,000 feet in the sky. At the same time, the revolting smell of sulfur filled the air, and made breathing difficult. Alvarez looked at the peak and said in awe,
a volcano. Santa Ana Gracia de Cordova.
The scene that unfolded before them was frightening, but at the same time, it was fascinatingly beautiful. They could not take their eyes off it. Shankar felt as if someone had lit innumerable firecrackers on the truncated peak of the mountain. The glowing red clouds of fiery smoke would die down, and then, all of a sudden, flare up and rise again by thousands of feet. The sight was accompanied by the sound of 1,000 bombs exploding simultaneously. The ground was shaking violently. After falling down a couple of times, Shankar entered their tent in faltering steps. A small, trembling animal was lying curled up in his bed. It looked like a puppy. Confused by the torchlight, it looked at Shankar with its glowing eyes. At that moment, Alvarez entered and said,
a leopard cub. Let it be, it's looking for shelter.
Neither of them had seen a volcanic eruption earlier. They had no idea what was to follow. Before Alvarez could finish, they heard a noise. A heavy object fell near their tent. They came out, and saw that a large piece of red-hot rock had fallen on a bush close at hand. The bush caught fire immediately. Alvarez said excitedly,
hurry up. Shankar, we must run. Let's take down the tent, now.
By the time they managed to wrap up the tent, another 4 or 5 balls of fire had fallen around them. The air had become even more foul, and breathing was now almost impossible. Run, run, run. For almost 2 hours they ran, partly carrying, partly dragging their tent and other belongings. They reached the bottom of the hill towards the east. But even there, they had no respite from the pungent smell. They rested for half an hour or so, but then, there too it started raining burning rocks. They had to climb up the mountain slope, rushing through shrubs. By dawn, they had climbed up about 2,000 feet. Panting heavily, they sat down, under a tree. When the sun rose, the glow of the volcanic eruption faded, but the sound increased, and so did the shower of rocks. And it was not just rocks, a fine dust of ash was coming down from the sky as well. In no time, a thin layer of gray dust collected on the leaves of the trees. The eruption continued through the day. It was night once more. The massive trees in the valley below them were black. They had been completely charred. In the night, the frightful but gorgeous spectacle came to life again. The fire cauldron within the volcano lit up the sky and the forest. All around, as far as they could see, the mountain forests looked red. The shower of rocks stopped. But red clouds continued to look menacingly from above. After midnight, they got up from their slumber, hearing a huge explosion. They watched the mountain peak, awestruck. The top of the fiery volcano had blown off. The valley between the two hills was completely destroyed by ash, molten lava, and the falling rocks. Alvarez was hit by a small piece of rock and their tent caught fire. Behind them, a high branch of a tree snapped, and fell as it was hit by a piece of heavy rock. Shankar thought that but for them, no one in the world would have known that such a spectacular natural event had taken place in the desolate forest. The civilized world was not even aware of the existence of the volcano. Perhaps, people would not believe them when they narrated this incredible story. In the morning, they could clearly see the notches on the top edge of the truncated volcano. Its serrated top looked like a blown-out candle. Someone had another bite off the inverted ice cream cone. Alvarez checked his map and said,
"The map does not show a volcano here. Perhaps this volcano has erupted after centuries. But the name of the mountain, given in the map, is significant."
Shankar asked, "What is it?" Alvarez said,
Aldonio, Lanai. In the old Zulu language, it means the throne of the fire god. The name suggests that long ago, people of this area knew of the existence of the volcano. Perhaps it was dormant for 100 years or more.
Shankar, a son of India, unconsciously touched his forehead with folded hands. "O God of fire, I bow to you. You have allowed me to watch your dance of annihilation. I thank you for granting me this rare honor. 100 diamond mines would pale in comparison to this spectacle. It is the ultimate reward for all the hardship I have gone through." Alvarez thought it would be dangerous to linger on near an active volcano. So, they left behind the smoking Aldonio Langai, and moved further towards the west. That part of the jungle had not been affected by the volcanic eruption. On the contrary, it was lush green with fresh plants, and bushes coming alive following the rains. There were lots of springs and rivulets, but the river they were looking for continued to elude them. During that part of their expedition, they came to a place that had granite and limestone hills. Many of the hills also had caves. And the caves were of different sizes, from small to gigantic hollows in limestone. The area was completely unlike the other terrains they had come across till then in the Richtersveld. The forest was not too dense either, although a lot of tall trees dotted the stone hills. They camped on a high granite hillock. Since they reached the rocky hills, a vague fear began to trouble Shankar. He thought there was something wrong with the place. He felt some disaster was waiting to happen, but he could not figure out why he felt so uncomfortable there. Neither could he explain to Alvarez what actually troubled him. After a few days, Alvarez said,
All our efforts have been useless, we are still in the death circle. This morning, once again I saw the tree with my initials, DA. But you know that we have been moving towards the west for the last 15 days. So how did we reach the same tree?
Shankar said, What shall we do now?
Tonight, I will climb to the top of a tall tree. I will be able to make out the directions by observing stars. You remain in the tent.
What Alvarez said baffled Shankar completely. If they had been moving in a circle, how did they reach this valley of low hills and caves? He could clearly remember that they had not come here earlier. Alvarez explained to him that the tree with his initials was only 2 miles away from where they were, towards the west. Earlier, when they found the tree, they did not move towards the east, so they never came to this place, although they came quite close by. That night, Shankar was alone in the tent, reading Bankim-Chandra's Rajsingha. This was the only book he had brought from home. Although he had read the novel many a time, he would read it again whenever he found the time. He had traveled far away from India, Chittor, Mewar, and the wars between the Mughals and the Rajputs too were far away from him. In the dense unknown African forest, they seemed fictional wars in imaginary lands. Shankar heard footsteps outside the tent. At first, he thought Alvarez was coming back. But in a moment, he realized that this could not be the footsteps of a man. The sound that he heard was something that might be produced if a lame man walked with a heavy weight tied to his feet. Alvarez's Winchester repeater was with Shankar. He crouched at the entrance of the tent with the rifle. The footsteps stopped for some time. Then it moved from the right of the tent to the left. Shankar could hear a large animal breathing. It was exactly like what they had heard on the night they were crossing the mountain. Shankar lost his nerve and pressed the trigger not once, but twice. Immediately, Alvarez responded from a treetop, firing his pistol twice. Alvarez thought Shankar was in danger, otherwise he would not have fired twice. Shankar also realized Alvarez might return to the tent immediately, without completing his mission. In the meantime, the animal fled, hearing the gunshots. Shankar no longer heard its footsteps. He came out of the tent. He wanted to send a signal to Alvarez with his electric torch, to say that he was all right. But before he could do anything, he heard 2 more pistol shots and a muffled cry. Shankar ran towards the sound. A little away, he found Alvarez lying under a tree. As Shankar turned on his torchlight on him, a cold shiver ran down Shankar's spine. Alvarez was covered in blood. His head was at an unusual angle to his torso. His jacket was torn to shreds. Shankar sat down and held Alvarez's head in his arms. He called, "Alvarez! Alvarez!" There was no response. Alvarez's lips quivered. He wanted to say something, but could not. His eyes were fixed at Shankar, but they looked blank. Even if he could see, he was unconcerned about what he saw. Shankar carried Alvarez to the tent, gave him water to drink. While he took off Alvarez's coat, he noticed that a large chunk of flesh had been torn off his shoulder. He had lacerations on his back too. It seemed an unusually strong animal had torn his back into shreds with its nails or teeth. Shankar had also noticed the footprints of the animal on the soft ground. They had only 3 toes. Alvarez's condition did not improve during the night. He neither spoke on his own nor answered Shankar's questions. By early morning, he regained consciousness for a short while. He had a dazed, vacant look in his eyes, and did not seem to recognize Shankar. Then he closed his eyes again. In the afternoon, he became delirious. He talked possibly in Portuguese. Shankar could not understand a word of what he said. A little before sundown, he suddenly fixed his eyes directly at Shankar. The way he looked, Shankar knew Alvarez had recognized him. Then, Alvarez said in clear English,
"Shankar, what for are you waiting? Take down the tent. We must start now."
He lifted his right hand in an attempt to show him something. He said,
"An enormous treasure lying down that cave. I can see it clearly. Can't you? And don't waste time. Take the tent down."
Those were the last words of Alvarez. For a long time, Shankar was too dumbfounded to move. He could not move a muscle. Evening came. Slowly, the entire forest was drowned in absolute darkness. Then suddenly, Shankar got out of his trance. He got up hurriedly and lit a fire. Then he loaded both the rifles, aimed towards the entrance of the tent, and sat beside Alvarez's body. Later in the night, another torrential downpour began. Rains lashed the jungle, and rainwater seeped through the tent and drenched everything. But Shankar's state of mind being what it was, he hardly noticed anything. In the last few months, he had developed a deep affection for Diego Alvarez. Shankar was greatly impressed by his fearlessness, his determination, his tremendous patience, his courage. Alvarez was a father figure to him. But more than anything else, Shankar found it inconsolable that Alvarez was killed by the same mysterious creature that had killed Jim Carter. As the night wore on, a terrible fear gripped Shankar. He was being stalked by a dangerous, unknown messenger of death. An animal shrouded in mystery. No one knew when and how it would strike again. There was no way Shankar could let his guard down. He stayed awake through the night. He would never forget the terror of that dreadful night. A relentless storm and large raindrops on leaves drowned all other sounds. From time to time, he also heard deafening noises as the storm uprooted massive trees. Through an opening in their tent, he watched the black trunks of trees that looked like ghosts. Innumerable fireflies kept dancing despite the rain. Shankar was keeping vigil over his friend's body. He was in a hopeless situation, but he could not afford to panic. He had to be calm, and in total control of his mind. Otherwise, he would die of fear. In his desperate attempt to drive away fear, he concentrated hard on the rifles. One was a Winchester, and the other a Mannlicher. Fear and danger make one courageous. Fear is the key to fearlessness. Loaded, Shankar told himself that there was no animal made of flesh and blood that could enter his tent unharmed. Shankar sat alertly through the night. The next morning, he buried Alvarez's body under a tall tree. He made a cross by tying 2 branches with strong creepers and placed it on Alvarez's grave. Among Alvarez's papers, there was a faded certificate. A diploma from Oporto Mining School in his name. Alvarez had graduated with honors. From the way he talked, Shankar had often felt that he was not just another uneducated vagabond in search of a fortune. Far away from human habitation, in the middle of that desolate, dense forest, a tired Alvarez's search for treasure had just come to an end. But it is not the temptation of treasure that motivates men like him. What inspires them is the fascination of the unknown, the unseen world. And of course, the challenge of facing dangers. Even the treasures of Kuber of Hindu mythology would not keep them in one place for long. It was an appropriate tomb for the fearless explorer Diego Alvarez. Trees of an ancient forest would provide shade to his grave. Leopards, gorillas, and hyenas would stand guard at night. Above all, the majestic Richtersveld mountain range, with its peaks venturing into the kingdom of clouds, would watch over Alvarez till eternity. Another day passed. The utter hopelessness of the situation made Shankar desperate. But he knew, if he panicked, there was little chance that he would leave that jungle alive. For 2 long days, he sat in his tent and thought. He concentrated hard, and analyzed the situation threadbare. He considered options, checked maps, made plans. Suddenly something that Alvarez had casually mentioned in a different context flashed through his mind. Salisbury, 400 to 500 miles from there. Towards the southwest. Salisbury, the capital of South Rhodesia. Somehow, Shankar had to reach Salisbury. He would live long. His horoscope had said so. He would not die a wretched death in that forlorn jungle. With no one around. Shankar studied all the maps carefully. A map charted by the Forest Survey team of the Portuguese government. A map of coastal Africa prepared by some marine surveyors, and another charted by the explorer Sir Filippo de Philip. Besides, there was a worn-out, faded sepia pencil sketch drawn by Alvarez and signed by Jim Carter. When Alvarez was alive, Shankar had not bothered to study the maps. But presently, his life depended on interpreting them correctly. He had to find out the shortest route to Salisbury. He had to estimate the latitude and longitude of his location, and escape the maze of the Richtersveld Mountains. His life depended on those imperfect maps. After studying them for hours, Shankar realized that none of them gave any useful details of the mountain forest he was in, except the one prepared by Carter and Alvarez. But even with that, Shankar had problems. Carter and Alvarez had probably thought, if their map found its way to someone else's hands, their treasure would be stolen. So, they had used a number of cryptic symbols and codes on the map. Shankar could understand only parts of it. 3 days after Alvarez's death, Shankar started off, towards the east. Before leaving the area, he made a wreath of wild flowers, and put it on Alvarez's grave. To survive in a wilderness, one has to learn bushcraft, that is, a set of skills that forest-dwelling people use to protect themselves from the dangers they often face. Shankar too had learned some of the tricks under Alvarez's watch, but he was not confident that he could deal with the forest all by himself. He had to depend entirely on destiny. If he was fortunate, he would survive. If he was not, then die. He prayed and hoped the power above would show him the way. He crossed a few low hillocks without much problem. The forest was dense in places and relatively light elsewhere. But all around, there were tall, massive trees. Shankar knew, if he could reach fields with elephant grass, he would have come out of the forest. Elephant or tussock grass does not grow in dense forests. But he saw no sign of grasslands. There were only massive trees with thick undergrowth. The first day ended with Shankar, in an even denser jungle. He had left behind most of his luggage. He carried only Alvarez's Mannlicher rifle, as many bullets as he could, the canteen, the torch, the maps, the compass, his watch, a blanket and some medicines. He also took a hammock with him. Although their tent was light, Shankar had to leave it behind. Everything together was far too heavy for him to carry alone. In the evening, he hung the hammock between 2 trees at a fairly good height. He also lit a fire below it to ward off predators. He lay down on the hammock, and stayed awake with the rifle by his side. He could not sleep for 2 reasons. Firstly, a swarm of insects made his life miserable. And secondly, a leopard started moving about shortly after sunset. In the darkness, its eyes glowed like 2 pellets of fire. It went away when Shankar flashed his torch, but came close soon after. A leopard is known as a cunning and skilled hunter. Shankar was afraid it would jump up and reach his hammock if he fell asleep. Besides, there were all kinds of animal noises through the night. Shankar hardly slept that night. He dozed off for a little while, and then he heard small children laughing nearby. He got up with a start. How there could be children in that deep jungle? The next moment he recalled, Alvarez had once told him that the screech of some baboons sounded just like children's laughter. In the morning, he got off and started walking again. Aircraft pilots use a term, flying blind. Shankar trekked through the forest in the same fashion, depending on more than anything else, his luck. He was not too sure in which direction he was going. As a result, he lost his bearings completely within 2 days. He realized how difficult it was to stick to a particular direction while walking through a jungle. There are countless trees, one can see only tree trunks all around. Above one's head is an endless canopy of branches, leaves and creepers. One does not see the sun, the moon or stars. Sunlight is diffused, and it is twilight through the day. Mile after mile after mile, the jungle looks the same. And his compass is dysfunctional. There is no way he can follow any definite direction. On the 5th day, he stopped at the bottom of a hill to rest. There was an enormous cavern nearby. A narrow stream flowed out from the entrance of the cavern, and meandered into the jungle. Shankar had not seen such a big cave earlier. As curiosity got the better of him, he left his backpack behind, and walked in. There was some light at the entrance of the cave, but inside, it was absolutely dark. He moved cautiously in torchlight, and after a while, reached a place where the cave forked into two narrow passages. Looking up in the torchlight, Shankar saw that the roof of the cave was at a great height there. Nature's own chandeliers hung from the ceiling in the shape of white stalactite formations of calcium carbonate. Water trickled down the walls at a number of places. From that fork, Shankar entered the passage on his right. The entrance was narrow, but gradually, the passageway became wider. Beneath his feet was soft wet earth, not hard rock. In the torchlight, he saw he was in a triangular hall, and at a corner of the triangle was another opening. After going through that opening, Shankar reached a narrow passage that had high walls of solid rocks on either side. This passage was narrow and serpentine, winding along whimsically. Shankar walked down for quite some time in the strange cavern. After about 2 hours, Shankar felt he should return. But as he was coming back towards the entrance, he could not find the triangular hall. He did not understand how he could have missed it. He was sure that the narrow, tunnel-like passage emerged from there. Logically, when he walked back to the beginning of the passage, he should have reached the triangular hall. But he did not. After searching for some time, Shankar felt nervous. If he could not find a way out, he would die a miserable death in that dark cave. He sat down and tried to regain his poise. He told himself that he just could not afford to panic. He had to keep a cool head. He recalled that Alvarez had taught him to leave marks along the path when he went to an unknown place, so that he could trace his way back. He had forgotten this basic lesson. What could he do now? Shankar was in a dilemma whether to light his torch or not. If the cells ran out, he would be doomed. But it was pitch dark within the cave, and he could not move even one step in that darkness. There was no question of finding his way. The day got over. The watch showed it was 7 in the evening. His torchlight was turning red. It was musty and hot in the cave, and Shankar had no drinking water with him. The water seeping down the stone wall was bitter and caustic. Even that bitter water flowed only in trickles. Shankar had to lick it from the surface of the wall. It would have become dark outside. His watch showed 7:30. 8 o'clock. 9 o'clock. 10 o'clock. Shankar was still searching. The torch had been almost continuously turned on since 3 in the afternoon. By now the cells were weak and the light dim. Shankar became frantic. He knew he could nurse hopes only as long as the torch kept going. Without light, there was only one prospect: he would rot in that hell. Even Alvarez would not have found his way in that solid darkness. Shankar switched off the torch and sat down on a boulder. Perhaps he could come out of that death trap if he had spare batteries, but there was little he could do without light. For a moment he thought he would wait for the morning and then start again. The next moment he remembered that day or night did not make the slightest difference in that cave. In desperation, he started walking in the dark, feeling the wall with his hands. He cursed himself for not carrying new cells when he entered the cavern. At the very least, he should have carried a matchbox. Going by the number of hours that had passed since he entered the cave, he thought it would be morning. But naturally, there was no hint of light in that eternal darkness. Perhaps he was destined to die a wretched death in that darkness. Perhaps he would never see daylight again. The dangerous rainforest had not been satisfied with the life of Diego Alvarez. It wanted Shankar's life too. Three days passed. Shankar had chewed the insoles of his boots. There was not even a cockroach or rat or scorpion to offer him an apology of a meal. Shankar thought he was becoming insane. He had no control over what he did, and his mind no longer registered anything. He was sure about only one fact. He had to get out of the death trap. He had to see the light of day again. So, he went on groping in darkness with his feeble body. He was determined to go on doing so as long as he was alive. At some point, he had no idea what the time was. He fell into an exhausted slumber. He didn't know how long he slept. The unforgiving darkness erased his concepts of day, night, hours, minutes, and seconds. Perhaps his eyesight too was failing. He was not too sure. After sleeping for some more time, he felt a little better. He got up and started moving again. He was a disciple of Diego Alvarez. He would not die a passive death. He would go on fighting till his last breath. Shankar suddenly realized that under his feet, he no longer felt the water of the stream he had seen at the entrance of the cavern. At some point, while going around in the maze of the cave, he had moved away from the stream. He thought there might be an escape route if he found the stream again, because the stream ultimately flowed out of the cave. But during the last days he was in the cave, he had not even found a thin trickle of water, let alone the stream. The thirst was killing. Shankar had been licking the caustic water from off the walls of the cave. His tongue had swollen from the effort, but it had done nothing to quench his thirst. If anything, it had increased it. He started searching for moss on the walls, so that he could eat some and save his life. But even that could not be found. The rocks were barren, with the exception of occasional thin layers of calcium carbonate. There were no plants or fungal growths like mushrooms. With absolutely no sunlight, no life form could germinate in the cave. Another day passed, and night came without Shankar knowing it. Despite all his efforts, Shankar was nowhere near finding an escape. He had become totally dispirited by then. How long could he go on? And anyway, what was the purpose of it all? It made no difference. There was no way out. Where was he going in that terrible darkness, in that deafening silence? It seemed as if the earth was dead, as if the last dance of destruction had put out the sun. In that lifeless, soundless, timeless void, Shankar was the only creature alive. If he did not find a way out quickly, he was going to become insane. Shankar dozed off again, or maybe, fainted. When he opened his eyes, the fluorescent dial of his watch showed 12. Perhaps it was midnight. Shankar pulled himself up and started off once again. After walking for a short while, he found a stone wall blocking his way. He flashed his torch for a moment, and saw in its dim shaft of light a barrier at right angles to the wall along which he had been walking. Suddenly, he heard a faint noise. Water was flowing somewhere nearby. He cocked an ear and listened. Yes, indeed it was the soft sound of a tiny spring, flowing over pebbles. He could also figure out, the sound came from the other side of the wall, that blocked his way. Once again, he turned the torch on for a few seconds, to look for a passage through the wall. To his delight, he found a low and narrow opening. After crawling through the crevice for some distance, he felt water stretching himself up gingerly. He discovered that he could even stand up at the place. After a few more steps ahead, his feet went under a stream of ice-cold water. In that absolute darkness, he bent down and drank to his heart's content. Then he checked the direction of the current. He was aware that generally, streams flow out of caves, and not the other way. So, he walked along the flow of the water for some time as the stream meandered along. After some distance, Shankar felt the stream had branched into 3 or 4 sub-streams. A swift flash of the torchlight confirmed it. A confused Shankar recalled Alvarez's teaching. If he did not leave signs from there on, he might get into trouble again. He bent down in search of something that could be used as markers, and found lots of pebbles in that shallow stream. The ice-cold water flowed over the pebbles. Shankar filled his pockets with the pebbles, and decided to explore each streamlet till the end. He moved forward, leaving pairs of pebbles by the side of the water. After some distance, the stream once again split into a number of smaller streamlets. At every point of branching, he made a sign of S with the pebbles. Some of the streamlets seemed to flow back to the point from where Shankar had started. In spite of leaving signs, Shankar found that maze of streams exceedingly confusing. Once he stepped upon something very cold and clammy. With a flash of his torch, he saw a huge python lying curled up beside the water. The python came out of its slumber, and looked at him with its beady eyes. Fortunately for Shankar, the torchlight confused it. Shankar knew how dangerous pythons were. He had heard instances of men fighting tigers with bare hands, but even the strongest of men could not escape the coil of a python. Had the snake caught him, it would have been his end. A new terror gripped Shankar. It was quite possible that another python was lying in wait for him. He examined a couple of streamlets, with the help of his signs, but he came back to the main point of distribution of the streamlets, which he had marked with a cross. Then he proceeded along a course that looked like the main distributary. After walking for some time, he realized even that stream split into many streamlets. In some places, the ceiling of the cave was so low that he had to bend down. Suddenly, Shankar saw, possibly in the last glimmer of his fading flashlight, he was in the triangular hall he had been in soon after entering the cavern. The same triangular area. He had nearly lost his life searching for that place. At last, he was back there. Soon, he saw stars framed in the dark entrance to the cavern. At last, he was safe. Another dreadful adventure was behind him. When Shankar came out of the cavern, it was 3 in the morning. The jungle was not too dense there, the sky above shone with millions of twinkling stars. After leaving the hell the cave had turned out to be, the cloudless starry sky seemed as bright as the illuminated streets of a metropolis. Shankar bowed down and thanked God for the unexpected reprieve. Dawn broke in a while and sunrays burst forth upon every branch of every tree. Shankar did not want to continue in that sinister place even for another moment. He had one pebble left in his pocket. Instead of throwing it away, he kept it as a memento of his dreadful experience in the cave. The next day, he came across elephant grass, and before evening, he crossed the threshold of the forest to reach an open space. That night, Shankar studied the maps over a long time. The flat open land in front of him stretched 300 miles, till the banks of the Zambezi River. A part of these 300 miles, almost 175 miles, fell in the northern fringes of the Kalahari Desert. A terrible, desolate place without water or tracks. Alvarez had noted from a military map that, instead of following a particular route along its northeastern boundary, one tried to cross the desert around the middle. It would be impossible. The desert was marked on the map as the land of thirst. But if he reached Rhodesia, it would be relatively easy, because there would be human habitation. Shankar's fortitude was to be tested again. Although he knew how daunting his task was, he would not give in. Alvarez had offered to cross this desert alone, and bring back food and ammunition from Salisbury. Shankar refused to accept that. He could not do what a 62-year-old man could. But courage and character are often poor substitutes for knowledge and experience. Shankar could not interpret the maps and identify the directions to places marked there. And he knew the bitter truth. The military map marked 2 oases, with their latitudes and longitudes. Alvarez used to work out the exact location of a place, by solving a complex problem involving the magnetic north and true north. Shankar had seen him doing so, but had not learned the tricks. Therefore, he was necessarily at the mercy of fate, and he was not unaware of the fact. So, leaving his future to destiny, Shankar doggedly prepared to cross the frightening Kalahari. The inevitable followed. Within 2 days, he found himself all at sea. He passed a point that was only 3 miles towards the north of an oasis. An experienced explorer could have found the place blindfolded from his map. But Shankar could not, although, at that time, he had nearly run out of water. He had to find water immediately. To begin with, there was only wide, open land with cacti and euphorbia, and occasional hillocks of granite. Gradually, the trek became exceedingly difficult. Shankar had no food or water, no trail to follow, and he could nurse no hope of meeting another human being. He walked towards the horizon for days together. It was a hopeless journey to nowhere. Above him, the sun glowed like a ball of fire, and beneath his feet, the sand was burning charcoal. The sun and moon rose and set, stars appeared at night and melted in the morning skies. Desert lizards made a monotonous noise, and so did the crickets when it became dark. There are no milestones in deserts. Shankar had no idea about the distance he had covered. His food consisted of a bird or two, at times the desert buzzard, the meat of which was tough and tasteless. He would even be delighted to catch a scorpion. He would consider it a stroke of good luck, even though a scorpion was venomous enough to kill a man. After 2 days of suffering without water, Shankar discovered water, in a crevice of a hill. The reddish water was full of insects. The swollen carcass of a big animal lay by its edge. Shankar drank as much as he could. The dirty water saved his life. One miserable day was followed by another. Shankar lost count of weeks or days. Exhausted and worn out, he had no idea where he was heading. But in his mind's eyes, he could see his village in Bengal, could see his India. Then he reached the edge of the real Kalahari. When he watched the desert from a distance, he shivered in silent terror. He wondered how anyone could walk across that shimmering wilderness. Only dunes stood out in that tawny featureless ocean of sand. The afternoon sun seemed to burn the barren earth. Even on the boundary of the desert, the thermometer would show a temperature of 127 degrees in shade. As we have seen, The maps clearly stated it was impossible to cross the desert except by a route along its northeastern edge, as there was absolutely no water anywhere else. That did not mean plenty of water was available along the northeastern route either, but after gaps of 30, 70, and 90 miles, there were 3 springs, where water seeped out through fissures in the ground. The springs, which were hidden in folds of hills, were not easy to locate. To make the task easier, the army map gave their latitudes and longitudes. But Shankar could not work out the latitude and longitude of a place. All that he knew was that he would stick to the northeastern periphery of the desert. On the 3rd day, Shankar discovered a spring by sheer chance. The water was muddy, it was almost boiling, but to Shankar, it tasted sweet and lovely. From there on, the desert turned even more hazardous. There was no sign of plants or any other living organism. Earlier, in the night his torchlight used to attract a few insects. But over time, even insects were not to be seen. The days were terribly hot, and the nights, bitterly cold. In the early morning, the cold was freezing, but he could not light a fire, as he had no firewood. Within a few days, he ran out of water again. In that vast ocean of sand, finding a 3 feet wide spring was as difficult as identifying a specific grain of sand. By evening, thirst made Shankar frantic. By then he had realized that his attempt to cross the pitiless Kalahari all alone was like committing a slow and painful suicide. But he was caught in a terrible situation, and he had no place to go back. Climbing on a high dune, he could see only yellowish-brown sand dunes, rising gently towards the east. Although the sun had set, the sky still had an orange tinge. There was a small hillock, a little way from where he stood, and from that distance, Shankar thought he saw a cave in the hillock. Such small granite hills were common in the area. They were called Kapi, in Rhodesia and Transvaal, which literally meant small hills. Shankar took shelter in the cave, for the night to keep the cold at bay. What followed was strange. Mountain of the Moon, written by Bibhuti Bhusan Bandyopadhyay.